Margaret Caldwell did not cry when he threw the coin. She watched it spin through the summer air and land in the dust at her feet, and she felt something inside her go very quiet. Not broken, not defeated, just still. The kind of still that comes right before a woman decides she will never again cross a single mile for a man who sees her body before he sees her soul. The entire platform had gone silent. 50 strangers watched. Nobody moved. And if you've ever been left standing somewhere you weren't wanted, stay with me. Because this story is for you. If this kind of story moves your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very last word. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The Kansas Sun in the summer of 1881 did not care about dignity. It beat down on the Dodge City Depot platform with the same indifference it showed to livestock and lumber and every other thing that passed through on iron wheels. The air smelled of coal smoke and horse sweat, and the particular kind of heat that makes a person feel exposed in ways that have nothing to do with the weather. Margaret Caldwell stepped off the train holding a worn leather suitcase in one hand and the hem of her traveling dress in the other. She was 26 years old. She had been awake for most of 30 hours. Her back ached from the bench seat, and her boots were too tight across the toes, and she had been mentally rehearsing this moment since somewhere around the Missouri border. She told herself she was ready. She told herself she would not be nervous. She scanned the platform for a face she had never seen in person, but felt certain she would recognize the face of a man who had written her 14 letters. Each one warmer than the last. Each one full of words she had read so many times. The paper had gone soft at the folds. Words like practical and capable and hard-working. Words that had made her believe for the first time in her adult life that someone was finally looking for exactly what she was. Nathaniel Brooks was not a hard man to find. He was tall and broad-shouldered, well-dressed in the way that frontier money allowed a good hat, clean boots, a vest without patches. He stood near the far end of the platform with two other men she didn't recognize. One hand resting on the fence post, the other holding a pocket watch he wasn't looking at. He was scanning the passengers coming off the train with the focused measuring kind of look a man uses when he's shopping for something specific. Maggie raised her hand. He saw her, and something happened to his face that she felt in her chest before she could name it. It wasn't surprise exactly. It wasn't anger. It was something slower and more deliberate, a kind of recalculation, the way a man's expression shifts when what he expected and what he got don't line up. His eyes moved from her face to her shoulders to her waist, and in the space of those 3 seconds, 14 letters and a 600-mile journey turned into something small and cold between them. He walked toward her anyway. She told herself that meant something. "Miss Caldwell," he said. His voice was exactly how she'd imagined it, low and assured. The voice of a man who expected to be listened to. "Mr. Brooks?" She held out her hand. "It's good to finally meet you." He shook it briefly, the way a man shakes hands with someone he is already planning to disappoint. "You look different," he said, "than I expected." Maggie kept her chin level. "I described myself honestly. Every letter." "You described yourself as plain." His eyes moved over her again. "That ain't the same thing." "I described myself accurately," she said, and she kept her voice steady, even though her heart was doing something complicated behind her ribs. "I told you I was a large woman. I told you I was not what most men consider handsome. I told you I had worked a farm and could manage a household and did not require fine things. I told you all of that, Mr. Brooks, in my second letter, and you wrote back and said those were the qualities you were looking for." He was quiet for a moment. Behind her, she heard the other passengers moving around them. The sound of the platform beginning to thin out, trunks being loaded, reunions happening in the warm, uncomplicated way reunions do when both people are glad to see each other. "I run a ranch," Nathaniel Brooks said finally. "I have a standing in this county. When I bring a woman home, people are going to have opinions." "People always have opinions," Maggie said. That's generally something that happens regardless of what the woman looks like. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and for a half second, she thought maybe she'd reached him. Maybe the woman who had written 14 careful letters was standing right in front of him, and he was finally going to see her. But what he said was, "I can't do this." The words came out flat. Not cruel, not apologetic, just flat. Like a door closing quietly. "I'm sorry you made the trip," he said. "I'll cover your return fare." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a gold coin. He held it out to her, and when she didn't take it immediately, he set it on top of her suitcase. And when she still didn't move, he dropped it, and it hit the platform boards and rolled and spun in that awful slow-motion way things fall when the entire world is watching, and you cannot do anything but stand there and breathe. It landed in the dirt at the edge of the platform. Maggie looked at it. Then she looked at Nathaniel Brooks. "Keep your coin," she said quietly. He was already turning away. He said something to the two men standing by the fence post. She couldn't hear it, but one of them glanced at her and laughed, and that sound small and careless, and absolutely not personal to him, landed somewhere inside her that no coin toss ever could have reached. She did not pick up the coin. She stood there with her suitcase and her tight boots and her 600-mile journey, and she let herself feel the full weight of the moment, because she had learned a long time ago that pretending something didn't hurt only made it come out sideways later. It hurt. She let it hurt. And then she breathed. The platform was nearly empty now. The train had taken on water and coal and was beginning to grunt and hiss in preparation for the next leg of its journey. A few stragglers moved past her. Nobody made eye contact. The particular mercy of frontier strangers is that they will witness almost anything without commenting, which is both a kindness and its own kind of loneliness. Maggie looked down the platform in one direction, then the other. She had 37 cents in her purse. She had no family waiting for her in Ohio. No family anywhere, really. Just a cousin who'd let her sleep on a pallet floor for 8 months while she saved enough for this trip. She had no return fare. She had a suitcase containing 2 dresses, a good wool shawl, a Bible with her mother's name written inside the front cover, a small tin of sewing supplies, and a jar of the blackberry preserves she'd made herself, because she'd read somewhere that a woman arriving as a mail-order bride ought to bring something homemade. The blackberry preserves felt very foolish right now. She sat down on the edge of the platform because her legs were suggesting she do that before they made the decision for her, and she set her suitcase beside her and stared at the empty tracks. She was thinking not dramatically, not in the swirling, desperate way, but practically the way a woman thinks when she has been thinking her way through hard things her whole life and has gotten rather efficient at it. She was thinking about options. She was thinking about what a woman with 37 cents and a jar of blackberry preserves actually does in a frontier town where she knows no one and is owed nothing. The list was short. She was still making it when she became aware of a presence nearby. Not threatening. Just there. She looked up. A man was standing about 10 feet down the platform, and he was not looking at her the way people had been looking at her for the past 10 minutes. He wasn't looking away either. He was just standing hat in hand with the particular stillness of a person who is trying to be near without intruding. The way you stand near someone at a graveside who you don't know well enough to touch but can't quite bring yourself to leave alone. He was somewhere in his mid-30s. Tall, but not in the showy way, the kind of tall that comes with a frame built for actual work rather than impression. His hat was good, but weathered his boots the same. The lines around his eyes were the kind that come from squinting into wind and sun for years, not from easy living. He had the look of a man who woke up before the sky did every morning and had made peace with that. Behind him, holding hands with each other, the way children do when they're in an unfamiliar place, were 2 little girls. They might have been 6 or 7. Blonde-haired, identically dressed in faded gingham, wearing expressions of wide, quiet attention that small children wear when they have already learned that the world contains things that are not all right. The man said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Ma'am." Maggie looked at him. "I ain't going to pretend I didn't see what happened," he said. And I ain't going to tell you it wasn't the most shameful thing I've witnessed on this platform in 15 years of coming through here. Because it was. Maggie said nothing. He turned his hat in his hands once. I also ain't going to offer you something that sounds like pity, because I don't reckon you're looking for that either. No, Maggie said. I'm not. Good. He looked at her steadily. Because what I'm about to say isn't pity. It's an honest proposition from a man in a difficult situation. Maggie studied him. You don't know me. No, he agreed. But I know what I just watched. I watched a woman get humiliated in front of a crowd of strangers by a man who didn't deserve the letters she sent him. And I watched that woman refuse to pick up a coin off the ground. And I've been standing here for 5 minutes trying to decide if I'm the kind of man who can walk away from that, and I've decided I'm not. He put his hat back on. My name is Cole Bennett. I've got a ranch about 12 miles northeast of here. I've got 800 acres of decent land that could be better. I've got cattle that are well managed and a house that is structurally sound, but not much else. He paused. And I've got 2 daughters who lost their mother 2 years ago, and have been without a woman's influence since then, which I can tell you from experience is something a father cannot fix, no matter how hard he tries. Maggie looked at the 2 little girls. They looked back at her with those serious, watchful eyes. I came to town today to pick up a supply order, Cole said. I was not expecting to make any other kind of arrangement, but sometimes life presents a situation, and you've got to decide on the spot whether you're going to respond to it honestly or spend the rest of the year wondering if you should have. You're asking me to come to your ranch, Maggie said. I'm asking you to consider it, he said. There wouldn't be any immediate expectation of anything permanent. You'd have your own sleeping space. You'd be compensated fairly for any household work. And if after some time both parties found the arrangement suited them, we could discuss something more formal. Maggie looked at him for a long moment. Why? She said. You saw me get thrown over by a man who didn't want me before I'd even said 10 words to him. What makes you think this is a reasonable proposition? Cole was quiet for a second. Then he said, Because the reason he threw you over had nothing to do with you. Maggie blinked. He threw you over because of what people in this town would say. Which tells me he's a man who cares more about other people's opinions than about what's actually standing in front of him. He looked at her directly. I don't run my ranch by committee. I don't make my decisions based on what the gossips at the feed store think I ought to do. And I don't need a beautiful wife. I need a capable woman who can be a mother to my daughters and a partner in building something that lasts. He paused. If any part of that description applies to you, I'd appreciate the chance to find out. Maggie looked down the empty track. She thought about the cousin's pallet floor. She thought about 37 cents. She thought about 12 miles of open Kansas road leading to a ranch she'd never seen owned by a man she'd known for less than 10 minutes who had 2 small daughters with serious eyes and matching gingham dresses. She thought about the coin in the dirt. She thought a woman who picks that coin up decides her worth. A woman who leaves it there makes a different kind of decision entirely. Mr. Bennett, she said, I have 37 cents a suitcase and a jar of blackberry preserves that seemed like a better idea this morning than it does right now. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. I can work, she continued. I can cook preserved food, manage accounts, mend clothing, tend animals, grow a kitchen garden, care for sick children, and solve most household problems that don't require a man's upper body strength, and some that do. I am not delicate. I do not require entertaining. I do not complain without cause, and when I do complain, I am specific about what the problem is and what I think should be done about it. That, Cole Bennett said, is the best set of qualifications I've heard in a long time. I also, Maggie said, would like it to be clear that I am not arriving at your ranch as a charity case. If I stay, I will work. I will earn my place. I'd expect nothing less, he said. She stood up. She picked up her suitcase. She did not look at the coin in the dirt. Then I suppose, she said, we'd better introduce ourselves to your daughters before they decide I'm someone they ought to be worried about. Cole turned and crouched down to the girl's level. Lily Emma, he said. This is Miss Maggie. She's going to ride back to the ranch with us today. The one on the left, Lily Maggie would learn, regarded her with the particular gravity of a child who has been managing her own feelings for long enough to be good at it. "Are you going to stay?" Lily asked. Maggie crouched down too so they were eye to eye. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'm going to try. Is that all right with you?" Lily thought about it. Then she nodded once with the solemnity of a small judge rendering a verdict. Emma, the other one, reached out and touched the edge of Maggie's sleeve, a tiny tentative gesture, barely there, and then pulled her hand back quickly. Maggie felt something loosen in her chest. "All right then," she said quietly. The ride out to the Bennett Ranch took just under an hour by wagon. Cole drove. Maggie sat beside him on the bench. The two girls rode in the bed behind them, occasionally visible over Maggie's shoulder, when she turned to check on them curled together like two halves of a single thing, watching the country go by with those serious matching eyes. Neither Maggie nor Cole said much for the first several miles. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had both recently made a decision they weren't entirely sure about, and had chosen to commit to it anyway, which creates a particular kind of quiet, wary, and watchful, but not hostile. After a while, Cole said, "You from Ohio, originally." "Born there," Maggie said. "Grew up on a farm outside of Dayton. My parents both passed by the time I was 20. My father first, then my mother the winter after." "Any other family?" "A cousin in Columbus. She means well." A pause. "We don't have much in common." He nodded. "I grew up in Missouri. Came out here about 10 years ago when land was cheaper and the cattle market looked promising." "Was it?" Maggie asked. "Promising. Some years more than others." He adjusted the reins. "It's good land. It does what you ask of it if you're willing to work." "I'm willing to work," Maggie said. "I noticed." Another silence, easy this time. "The girls!" Maggie said, not as a question, but as a way of opening the subject carefully. "Lily's the talker when she feels safe," Cole said. "Emma's quieter. They're both smart. Too smart maybe for their own peace of mind." He paused. "They took their mother's passing hard. Lily got angry. Emma got careful." "And how did you take it?" Maggie asked. He was quiet for a beat. "About the same as them, in different amounts." Maggie nodded. She did not press. The ranch came into view from the top of a low rise, not the grandest spread she'd imagined when she was reading Nathaniel Brooks' letters, but solid. A main house with a covered porch, a good-sized barn, a smaller outbuilding, several corrals, fields that needed attention, but showed the evidence of capable hands. It was the kind of place that had been loved and then grieved and was waiting to be tended to again. She recognized that feeling. Cole pulled the wagon up near the house and set the brake. He climbed down and came around to offer her a hand, which she accepted. Not because she needed it, but because it was the gesture of a man who understood that help offered with respect is not the same as help offered out of condescension. The girls scrambled out behind them. Maggie stood in front of the house and looked at it. "Well," she said mostly to herself, "it needs work," Cole said, which was honest. "Most things worth having do," she said. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the door. Inside she found a kitchen that was functional, but neglected, not dirty exactly, but sparse and joyless the way spaces go when the person who knew how to make them comfortable is gone. She set her suitcase down and stood in the middle of it, and she took a breath, and she thought, "All right. You hungry?" she asked, turning to the room where Cole stood in the doorway, and Lily and Emma hovered at his elbows. Three heads nodded. "Then, let's start there," Maggie said. She found flour. She found salt pork. She found dried beans that needed soaking, and a small crock of lard, and half a sack of cornmeal, and a few withered onions that still had life in them. She found a cast iron pan that was excellent once she got a fire going and let it heat properly. She cooked. The girls watched from the table, first one at a time, and then both elbows on the wood chins in their hands. Cole came and went, bringing in wood, checking on the horses, doing the things a man does when he's trying to give a woman space to find her footing without making her feel watched. When the food was ready, she called them in. They ate, and for a few minutes, the kitchen was full of the sound of people sharing a meal, which is one of the oldest forms of hope there is, and still one of the most reliable. Miss Maggie. Emma said the first time she'd used words directly at Maggie, rather than at her father. "This is good." "Thank you, Emma," Maggie said. Lily looked at her across the table. "Are you going to be here tomorrow?" Maggie looked at the child. She looked at Cole, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Careful, watchful something underneath it that might have been the early stages of trust. "Yes," Maggie said. "I'm going to be here tomorrow." That night, after the girls were asleep, Maggie sat alone in the small room Cole had shown her, a spare room off the back of the house, clean if bare with a window that faced east, so she'd see the sunrise. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed with her suitcase open beside her, and the Bible with her mother's name in the front cover on her knee, and she thought about the day. She thought about Nathaniel Brooks and the coin in the dirt. She thought about 50 strangers on a platform who had watched and said nothing. She thought about Cole Bennett, who had said nothing for a long moment, and then said exactly the right thing. She thought about Emma's small hand reaching out and pulling back. She thought about Lily's question. "Are you going to stay?" She did not know yet if this would work. She did not know if Cole Bennett was a good man in all the ways a man needed to be good, or only in the way he'd shown her so far, which was considerable but not comprehensive. She did not know if two little girls who had already lost one woman could afford to grow attached to another one, and what that would cost them if it went wrong. She knew she was 37 cents from nowhere. She knew she had nowhere else to go that wasn't a step backward, and she knew with the particular clarity that comes to women who have been underestimated their whole lives and have learned to be very quiet and very honest with themselves about what they actually knew, that something real had happened today. Not a rescue, not a fairy story. Something harder than that and more interesting, a chance. An honest, provisional, uncertain chance offered by a man who had crouched down to his daughter's level and said her name. That was enough to work with. She had always been good at working with what she had. She set the Bible on the windowsill, lay down on the narrow bed fully dressed, and was asleep inside. 2 minutes, the deep, heavy sleep of someone who has been carrying something a long way and has finally, at least temporarily, set it down. In the room down the hall, she didn't know it yet, but Lily Bennett had gotten out of her bed and padded to the doorway of her father's room. "Papa," she whispered. Cole stirred. "Yeah, Lily. Is Miss Maggie going to leave like Mama did?" There was a long silence. "Miss Maggie didn't go anywhere tonight," Cole said carefully. "But is she going to—" Another silence. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope not." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She smells like blackberries." Cole didn't say anything to that, but he lay awake for a while after Lily went back to her room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a woman who'd traveled 600 miles on the strength of 14 letters and walked off a train platform with her chin level and left a gold coin lying in the dirt. He thought that was someone worth knowing. He thought that, and then he went to sleep, and outside the Kansas stars came out one by one, and the prairie did what it always did, held everything, and gave nothing away. Morning was going to come early. It always did out here. And somehow, for the first time in 2 years, Cole Bennett found himself thinking that was not entirely a bad thing. The next morning came the way Kansas mornings always did, without apology, without preamble, without any particular concern for whether the people it found were ready for it. Maggie was already in the kitchen when the sky went from black to gray. She had found the night before a small crack in the wall near the stove where cold air came through, and she'd stuffed it with a piece of cloth torn from the hem of her oldest petticoat. She had found that the flue needed adjusting before the fire would draw properly. She had found a skillet that someone had left with grease dried in it and had soaked it overnight so it would scrub clean in the morning. These were not dramatic discoveries, but they were the kind of discoveries a woman makes when she is not visiting a place, when she is quietly, seriously deciding whether to belong to it. She had biscuits in the pan and salt pork sizzling and coffee on the boil when she heard the first small footstep in the hallway. Emma appeared in the doorway. She was still in her nightgown, her blonde hair loose and tangled from sleep. One hand gripping the doorframe, the way children grip things when they're not sure if they're allowed to come closer. Maggie didn't make a fuss of it. She didn't turn around with a big welcome or a performance of warmth, because she had been around enough children to know that performing warmth at a cautious child usually sends them straight back down the hall. She just said without turning, "There's a stool on the left side of the stove if you want to sit where it's warm." A pause. Then the sound of small feet crossing the kitchen floor. Emma climbed onto the stool and folded her hands in her lap and watched Maggie work with those grave, dark eyes that made her look sometimes like a very small person who had seen too much already. They stayed like that in silence for several minutes, Maggie cooking, Emma watching, and it was not uncomfortable. It was the particular kind of quiet that two people can share when neither of them is trying to be anything other than what they are. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said finally. "You can ask me anything," Maggie said. "Why didn't you pick up the coin?" Maggie turned the salt pork in the pan and considered her answer the way she considered most things, not quickly, but honestly. "Because picking it up would have meant I agreed with what he thought of me," she said. "And I didn't." Emma thought about that for a moment. "What did he think of you?" "He thought I wasn't worth much." "But you are," Emma said simply directly, with the absolute certainty that children sometimes have about things that adults have convinced themselves are complicated. Maggie felt something shift behind her sternum. She kept her eyes on the pan. "Thank you, Emma," she said quietly. The back door opened, and Cole came in from the early morning chores, stamping mud from his boots hat in hand. He stopped when he saw the kitchen, the fire, the coffee, the biscuits, the smell of food that had not been in this house at this hour in longer than he wanted to think about. He stood there for a second and didn't say anything. Maggie glanced at him. "Sit down. It'll be ready in a few minutes." "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to," she said. "I was up. The kitchen was here. It seemed like the sensible thing." Cole hung his hat on the hook by the door and sat down across from Emma, and something about the way he looked at his daughter, this small, serious child who was sitting quietly in the kitchen while a woman cooked breakfast, just like she used to do, made him press his mouth together briefly before he said anything. "Sleep all right?" he asked Maggie. "Well enough," she said. Lily came in at a run 3 minutes later, still half asleep, her hair in disarray, and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway, exactly the way Emma had, except Lily's version was louder. "You're still here," she said. "I'm still here," Maggie confirmed. Lily looked at the biscuits, then at Maggie, then at the biscuits again. "I told Emma you'd probably still be here," she said in the tone of someone who had not in fact said this. "Did you?" Maggie said. "Yes." Lily climbed into her chair with the unself-conscious confidence of a child who owned the space she occupied. "Emma said she wasn't sure, but I said you would be." Emma across the table did not visibly react to this revision of history. Cole caught Maggie's eye, and something passed between them. Brief, involuntary, the kind of shared moment that happens when two adults witness a child being transparently a child, and neither of them can quite help it. It wasn't much, but it was something. That first week Maggie worked. She worked the way she had always worked, not to impress, not to perform capability, but because the work was there, and she was the person present to do it. And doing things properly had always been for her the closest thing to dignity she'd been reliably able to access. She scrubbed the kitchen from the floorboards up. She found a systematic rot in one of the window frames and told Cole about it directly and without drama, the way you tell someone about a problem when you expect them to actually fix it. She reorganized the food stores, what they had, what they needed, what the order of priority was, and wrote it out on a piece of brown paper she tacked inside the pantry door. She found the girls' school books gathering dust in a trunk in the back room. "Who was teaching them before?" she asked Cole that evening. He was mending a harness at the kitchen table. He didn't look up. I was. When I had time. When did you last have time? A pause. A while. Maggie pulled out the books and stacked them on the table. I'll start in the mornings after breakfast. An hour, maybe an hour and a half. Reading and numbers. Cole looked up then. You don't have to. Cole. She said his name with a calm level quality that stopped him mid-sentence. I am going to do a thing, and then I am going to tell you I did it. I am not going to ask permission for every useful thing I decide to do. If something I decide to do is wrong, tell me, and I'll stop. But I'd rather apologize for overstepping than wait for an invitation to be helpful. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. All right. Good, she said, and opened the first book. The lessons started the next morning, and they were in the beginning chaotic. Lily could already read reasonably well, and knew it, and had opinions about the pace. Emma could read, but didn't volunteer this information, and had to be discovered. Maggie noticed her mouthing the words on the page when she thought no one was watching, tracking every line with a small, careful finger. Emma, Maggie said gently during the second lesson, will you read the next passage? Emma looked up. Me. You. A pause. I don't read very well. Let's find out, Maggie said, which was different from saying, you're wrong, or of course you do. And Emma noticed the difference, and picked up the book and read haltingly at first, then more evenly. Her voice quiet but steady, every word in the right place. When she finished, she looked at Maggie. That was well done, Maggie said. Not effusively, just honestly. Something opened in Emma's face that had not been opened before. Lily, who had been watching all of this with the eagle-eyed assessment of an older twin. Older by 4 minutes, a fact she referenced often, said, she reads better than she thinks she does. Most people do, Maggie said. Most people think they're worse at things than they are because someone told them they were bad at it early on and they believed it. Lily stared at her. Who told you something like that? Maggie looked at the table for a second. Quite a few people, she said. Over quite a few years. There was a short silence. Were they right? Lily asked. No, Maggie said simply and without heat. They weren't. Outside the walls of the ranch, the town of Dodge City had its own relationship with what was happening at the Bennett property. News travels fast in a small frontier town, and the news that Cole Bennett had brought the rejected mail-order bride back to his ranch had completed its circuit through the feed store and the dry goods counter and the Sunday service benches within approximately 48 hours of Maggie's arrival. The opinions were varied, but not particularly charitable. Maggie encountered them for the first time at the end of her first week, when Cole took her into town for the supply run he'd originally come in for when he'd found her on the platform. She had known people would look. She had not quite anticipated the way a frontier town looks openly steadily without the pretense of discretion that city people sometimes maintain because out here there was simply too much space and too little entertainment for people to waste a good spectacle on subtlety. She walked into the dry goods store beside Cole and felt the attention of every person in it land on her like a weather change. A woman near the bolts of fabric, well dressed by local standards. The wife of someone with standing, Maggie would learn later, said something to the woman beside her in a voice pitched just low enough to be deniable and just loud enough to reach. Maggie heard the word unfortunate. She heard the word peculiar. She heard a small crystalline laugh. She kept walking. Cole beside her had also heard. He stopped. Maggie felt him stop and kept moving for 2 more steps before she turned. He was looking at the woman near the fabric bolts with an expression that wasn't angry exactly. It was quieter than angry and more serious than angry. The expression of a man making a considered decision about something. Mrs. Hartwell, he said in a carrying voice that had no performance in it, just volume and clarity and intent. The woman looked at him. Mr. Bennett? I believe you know who this woman is, Cole said. Mrs. Hartwell smiled thinly. I believe most of Dodge City does by now. Then I'd like to make sure most of Dodge City also knows the following. Cole said in that same carrying, undramatic voice. Miss Caldwell is a guest in my home and is under my account at this store. Any discourtesy shown to her will result in my account being moved to wherever in this county discourages discourtesy. I believe that's Ellsworth. A silence in the store. Mrs. Hartwell's smile went flat. I see, she said. Good, Cole said. He turned and walked to where Maggie was standing and began reading from the supply list without any particular change in his manner, as if he'd merely commented on the weather. Maggie looked at the list with him and did not say anything for a moment. Then she said quietly enough that only he could hear, You didn't have to do that. No, he agreed just as quietly. But I did want to. She looked at the list. Salt, flour, and lamp oil are the priorities. Agreed, Cole said. They moved through the store, but Maggie had noticed something she did not say aloud. The clerk behind the counter had straightened up. The two men near the door had glanced at each other and then away. And Mrs. Hartwell had turned back to her fabric bolts and was examining a bolt of blue calico with intense and entirely unconvincing focus. Cole Bennett had not yelled. He had not threatened. He had simply made it clear in front of witnesses that this woman mattered to him. And in a small frontier town, that was the kind of thing that moved slower than rumor, but held longer. On the way home with the supplies loaded in the wagon bed, Lily leaned over from the back and tugged Maggie's sleeve. I heard what Papa said in the store, she said. Did you? Maggie said. Mrs. Hartwell is mean, Lily said with the frank assessment of a child who has been the subject of mean and knows it when she sees it. She said once that Emma and me looked like ragamuffins. Maggie turned to look at her. What did you do? Lily considered. I told her that ragamuffins were still people. Maggie held her gaze for a moment. That, she said, was exactly right. Lily sat back satisfied. Emma beside her was watching Maggie's face. Miss Maggie, she said. Yes. Are you going to stay now for a long time? The wagon rolled through the afternoon light. Cole kept his eyes on the road. Maggie turned to look at Emma and Lily. These two small, serious girls who had been managing without a mother for 2 years and were still somehow asking questions instead of closing doors. I'm working on it, she said. It was not a promise, but it was not nothing either. The weeks that followed had a rhythm to them that Maggie settled into. The way you settle into boots that need breaking in with some resistance at first, and then one day you notice you've stopped thinking about it. She and Cole developed a working relationship that was in its way one of the most functional partnerships she'd ever been part of, and she had been part of very few, because most partnerships in her experience had come loaded with someone's assumptions about what she was and wasn't capable of. Cole made no assumptions. Or more precisely, he made one assumption, which was that she would do what she said she would do, and he was correct. And that seemed to satisfy him. He told her things about the ranch directly. What the land needed, where the fence line was failing, why the north pasture hadn't been rotated properly in 2 seasons. He talked to her about these things the way he would have talked to a competent foreman, without explaining things she could figure out herself and without omitting things she needed to know. She told him things back. What the household accounts actually showed. That the flour supply would last 3 weeks, not 5. That Lily was advanced in her reading and needed more challenging material. That Emma had been having nightmares, she could hear her sometimes across the hall and might benefit from a lamp left burning. Cole went out and bought a small tin lamp the next day and put it in the girls' room without commenting on it. That was the kind of man he was. One afternoon, about 3 weeks in, Maggie was at the kitchen table working through the household accounts when she found something that made her go still. She sat with it for a moment, looking at the numbers. Then she got up and went to find Cole. He was in the barn working on a bridle. Cole, she said, when did you last get the full price for your beef? He looked up. What? The accounts from the last 2 seasons. She held up the ledger. You're selling to Whitfield and Sons at the Exchange House. Their rate per head is 18% below the going rate at the Ellsworth terminal. Cole set down the bridle. Whitfield's been buying Bennett cattle for 6 years. I know. And for 6 years you've been leaving money on the table. She turned the ledger so he could see it. This number here, this is what you received. This number here, this is what you would have received if you'd gone to Ellsworth or used the Cattle Association broker. She pointed. The difference over 2 seasons is enough to repair the north fence line and buy the breeding stock you told me you need. Cole looked at the numbers for a long time. Maggie waited. How do you know what the Ellsworth rate is? He said finally. I asked the clerk at the dry goods store, she said. He knew. Most people know Cole. The people who don't know are the people who trust the same buyer out of habit and don't ask. He was quiet. Then he said, You went into town and asked questions about cattle rates. I did. Why? Maggie looked at him directly. Because this is a ranch that deserves to do better than it's been doing, and I don't know how to do nothing while something's wrong. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I'll write to the Ellsworth broker this week. I already drafted the letter, Maggie said. It's on the kitchen table. You just need to sign it. He stared at her. She held his gaze without apology. You drafted the letter, he said. It seemed more efficient. You drafted a business letter. Cole, she said with a patience that was beginning to have something else underneath it, something warmer, something almost amused. I ran my parents' farm accounts from the time I was 14 years old. I know how to write a letter to a cattle broker. A pause. Is there anything else you've done that I don't know about yet? He asked. I renegotiated the credit terms at the dry goods store, she said. The previous arrangement had you paying a carrying charge that wasn't standard. The new terms are net 30 with no carrying charge. Cole put down the bridle completely. He sat on the fence rail. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not displeasure, not exactly surprise. Something more like a man who set out looking for someone to cook meals and fold laundry, and has discovered he has, through no particular planning of his own, acquired something considerably more complex and considerably more valuable. Is there anything, he said carefully, that you can't do? Maggie considered the question with genuine seriousness. I cannot, she said, play piano. I've tried. It doesn't take. Cole looked at her. Then he laughed a real laugh, the sudden, unguarded kind that happens when something catches a person off guard, and they don't have time to moderate their response. It transformed his face entirely, made him look younger and less careful, made him look like a person who laughed, and not just a person who managed things. Maggie had not heard him laugh before that. She thought it was a very good sound. She walked back toward the house. Behind her she heard him pick up the bridle again, still chuckling under his breath, and she allowed herself walking away where he couldn't see the smallest possible smile. That evening after supper, Cole read the letter she'd drafted. He read it twice. Then he signed it. Maggie noticed that he signed his name below hers on the postscript line where she'd written, Correspondence regarding the above may also be directed to Monsieur Caldwell, Ranch Household Manager. He didn't comment on that. But he didn't remove it either. The town's opinion shifted in small increments, the way opinion shifts when it's moved by evidence rather than argument, gradually, almost imperceptibly. And then one day you realize it's different than it was. It was the rancher Perkins who first said it out loud to Cole at the feed store about a month after Maggie arrived. Your place looks better, Perkins said. He said it simply as an observation, the way men in that country talked about land and animals, and things you could see with your own eyes. Cattle are looking better too. Heard you signed with the Ellsworth broker. I did, Cole said. Good move. Perkins tipped his hat. Woman's good for the place, Bennett. It was not a poetic compliment, but it was a true one. Word got around the way word gets around in small places, which is to say faster and more thoroughly than any newspaper. The Bennett ranch was looking better. The Bennett girls were doing their schoolwork. Cole Bennett had started getting a fair price for his cattle. And all of it had happened after the large woman from the train platform moved in. People in Dodge City were in the main practical, and practical people respond to evidence. Even Mrs. Hartwell, Maggie noticed, had stopped performing her thin smile and taken up something closer to careful neutrality, which from Mrs. Hartwell was approximately the same as warmth. But the thing that changed the town's opinion most completely was not the accounts or the cattle or the schoolwork. It was a Saturday morning about 5 weeks in when a young woman named Clara Yates came to the ranch door. Clara was maybe 20, pale and thin and frightened-looking in the particular way of someone who has been frightened for long enough that it has become their resting expression. She had a bruise along her jaw that she was not quite successfully hiding under the brim of her hat. "I heard," she said to Maggie, when Maggie opened the door, "that you're a woman who solves problems." Maggie looked at her. She looked at the bruise. "Come inside," she said. Clara came in and sat at the kitchen table and told Maggie in a low and careful voice about a husband who used his hands and a landlord who was threatening to put them out, and a situation that had run out of reasonable exits. Maggie listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer her opinion on any of the choices Clara had made to get here. She just listened, the way a woman listens, who understands that what someone in pain needs first is to be heard and not managed. When Clara finished, Maggie said, "Can you cook?" Clara blinked. "What? Can you cook? Can you take in mending? Can you keep books?" Yes, I can cook, and I can sew. There's a boarding house on the west end of Calvert Street," Maggie said. "The widow Morrison runs it. She's been trying to find someone to help with cooking and laundry for 2 months. The position comes with a room." She paused. "I know this because I had a conversation with her last week when I dropped off a jar of preserves and she mentioned it in the course of conversation." Clara stared at her. Why would you?" "Because I was paying attention," Maggie said simply. "And because sometimes paying attention to the right thing at the right time is the only thing that helps." "Do you want me to write you a letter of introduction to Mrs. Morrison?" Clara said, her voice unsteady. "Why would you do that for me?" "You don't know me." Maggie looked at her steadily. "I know what it looks like when a woman needs someone to take her seriously," she said. "And I know what it meant to me once when someone did." She wrote the letter. Clara Yates moved into the widow Morrison's boarding house 4 days later, and that, more than the cattle rates, more than the dry goods account, more than the schoolwork and the clean kitchen, and the repaired window frame, was the thing that people talked about afterward. Not as gossip, but as the kind of story that gets told when someone is trying to explain to a newcomer what kind of woman Maggie Caldwell was. She was the kind who paid attention. She was the kind who used what she knew on behalf of someone who had less. She was the kind who wrote the letter. Cole heard about it from the widow Morrison herself when he came in to pick up a package. Mrs. Morrison told him about it with a directness that brooked no misunderstanding. "That woman of yours," she said. "She's not—" Cole started. "That woman at your ranch," Mrs. Morrison corrected, without particular interest in the distinction, "is the best thing that's come through this town in several seasons. I want you to know that I intend to say so to anyone who still has reservations." Cole drove home that afternoon with the package and that piece of information, and something else. Something he'd been aware of for a while, but had not yet put language to the way you're aware of a change in weather before you can name what it's changing to. That evening, after the girls were in bed, he and Maggie sat at the kitchen table with the last of the coffee and the household accounts between them, and it was so ordinary, and so right so quietly and unexpectedly right, that for a moment he couldn't think of anything to say. Maggie looked up from the ledger. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. She looked at him for a moment with those clear, direct eyes. "Cole," she said, "I've noticed that when you don't say something, it's usually because you're deciding whether it's worth saying." He was quiet for a beat. "Mrs. Morrison told me about the letter you wrote for Clara Yates," he said. Maggie looked back at the ledger. Clara needed somewhere to go. "You've been here 5 weeks," he said. "You knew about a job opening at the Morrison boarding house." "I pay attention," she said. "I noticed," he said. A pause. "Maggie." He said her name the way he said things when he'd decided something was worth saying. "I want you to know that what you've done here, what you've built here in 5 weeks, I don't take it for granted. I want you to know that." She kept her eyes on the ledger for a moment. Then she looked up. "I don't do it for credit," she said. "I do it because this place needed doing, and I had the ability to do it, and—" She stopped. "And," he said. She was quiet for a second. "And because it started to feel like mine," she said simply, and a little carefully, the way you say something true that you weren't entirely planning to say. The kitchen, the accounts, the lessons. A beat. The girls. Cole held her gaze. The lamp between them burned steadily. Outside, the Kansas night pressed in around the house, and the cattle moved somewhere in the dark, and the wind went under the eaves the way it always did, familiar now, less lonely than it had been. "It is yours," Cole said quietly. Maggie looked at him. He held her gaze without flinching. "This place," he said. "It's yours. Whatever you want to call that. Whatever arrangement we decide it is, the place is yours. You've earned it more thoroughly than most people earn most things." Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "All right." Not dramatically. Not with tears. Just all right. The way a woman says it when she's been waiting a long time for someone to say something true and has finally heard it and knows better than to make a performance out of the relief. She looked back down at the ledger. "The North Pasture account needs to be separated from the main cattle account," she said. "If we're going to track the improvement properly, we need distinct columns." "Agreed," Cole said. He pulled the ledger toward him so they could both see it. Their heads bent over the same page. The lamp burned on, and in the room down the hall, where a small tin lamp glowed through the night, two little girls slept without nightmares, for the first time in a very long time. The letter from the Ellsworth broker came back signed and favorable, and Cole read it twice at the kitchen table, before sliding it across to Maggie without a word. She read it once, set it down, and said, "Good. That's settled then." Cole looked at her. "That's 2 years of underpayment reversed in one letter." "It's one letter," she said. "Don't let Whitfield know you're leaving before the current contract expires, or he'll cause trouble." "How do you know that?" "Because that's what men like Whitfield do when they lose something they thought they owned." She stood and poured more coffee. "Give him the professional courtesy of proper notice, and not 1 day more." Cole accepted the coffee. He accepted, too, the particular quality of her certainty, the way she spoke about difficult men and difficult situations, with the calm of someone who had been navigating both since long before she had any business needing to. He didn't ask where she'd learned it. He was beginning to understand that Maggie Caldwell had been educated by a harder school than most, and that the curriculum had been extensive. What neither of them knew sitting at that table on that ordinary morning was that the hardest lesson of the season was still coming. And it was coming from the West, the way most hard things in Kansas came, without warning, without mercy, and faster than anyone was ready for. The first sign was the cattle. Cole noticed it on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before the storm actually arrived. The herd was restless in a way that wasn't hunger or thirst, or ordinary agitation. It was the deep animal unease of creatures whose instincts are older than language, and considerably more reliable. He mentioned it to Maggie at noon. "How restless," she said. "The kind that means something," he said. She looked out the window, at the sky, clear, almost entirely clear, with just a bruised quality along the western horizon that could have been nothing. "I'll bring more wood in this afternoon," she said. "Maggie." "I grew up in Ohio," she said. "I know what a sky looks like when it's deciding something." By Thursday morning, what the sky had been deciding had arrived at a conclusion. It came in the night, not gradually, not with the polite advance warning of a normal Kansas storm, but the way the worst ones come, all at once, as if the weather had been saving itself and had finally run out of patience. Wind first hard enough to shake the house on its foundation, rattling the window frames, and sending something a bucket, a loose board, skidding across the yard with a sound like a gunshot. Maggie was up before Cole knocked on her door. "The cattle," he said when she opened it. "I heard," she said. She was already dressed. "How bad?" "Bad enough. North fence line may be down. If the herd pushes through in this, Go, she said. I've got the girls. He looked at her for 1 second, that particular look of a man who needs to be in 2 places and has just been given permission to be in the right one. I'll be back before Cole. She held his gaze. Go, we'll be fine. He went. Maggie turned back into the house and found Lily and Emma already in the hallway. Lily holding the lamp, Emma gripping her sister's arm with both hands. Is Papa gone? Emma said. He'll be back, Maggie said, with the specific quality of certainty that is not a promise about the future, but a commitment about the present. I am here. I am not leaving. You are not alone. Come to the kitchen. We're going to get the fire built up, and we're going to stay together. Lily said, What if the fence breaks? Then your papa fixes it, Maggie said. What if he can't get back? Maggie looked at her. Then we manage until he can. That's what we do. Come on. They moved to the kitchen. Maggie built the fire high and banked it carefully. She found the extra blankets she'd stored in the chest near the stove. She'd put them there 6 weeks ago because she'd noticed the chest was in a warm corner and thought it might be useful someday, and had not said anything about it because it was a small thing. Right now, it was not a small thing. She wrapped 1 blanket around each girl and kept one for herself and pulled the kitchen table close to the stove, and they sat together, the 3 of them, and listened to the storm. The wind sounded like something alive. It pressed against the walls and found every small gap and sent cold fingers through every crack Maggie hadn't yet gotten to, and the lamp on the table guttered and held and guttered again. Emma pressed herself against Maggie's side. Maggie put her arm around her. Lily on the other side was very quiet, which for Lily was more alarming than tears would have been, because Lily's silence meant she was thinking hard about something she didn't know how to say. Lily, Maggie said quietly. Lily looked at her. Her voice, when it came, was smaller than usual. Mama died in the winter, she said. Not a storm, but it was cold, and Papa was outside and he couldn't get back in time. And by the time he did... She stopped. The fire crackled. Emma made a sound against Maggie's side that was not quite a word. Maggie tightened her arm around Emma and looked at Lily steadily. I hear you, she said. And then, because this child deserved honesty and not comfort that came at the expense of truth. I can't promise you nothing bad is ever going to happen, but I can promise you that right now in this house you are safe. And your father knows this land. He knows every inch of it in the dark. Whatever's out there, he knows it better than it knows him. Lily held her gaze for a long moment. Then she moved over on the bench and pressed herself against Maggie's other side. Maggie sat between those 2 girls with a blanket over her shoulders and a fire burning in front of her, and the storm shouting itself out against the walls, and she felt under the worry, underneath the alertness she was maintaining, because 2 children were counting on her to something that was almost peace. This was what she'd been for all along. Not the polished parlor that Nathaniel Brooks had wanted. This. Exactly this. An hour passed. Then another. The fire held. The walls held. The girls dozed against her, one on each side, warm and breathing and present. And Maggie stayed awake and listened to the storm and listened to the house and listened for anything that needed her attention. What she heard at the edge of 2 hours was nothing. The absence of Cole. He should have been back. She knew the distance to the north fence line. She'd walked it twice with him in the fall going over the repair plan. Even in rough conditions, even with the herd to manage, he should have been back, or she should have heard the barn door. She heard nothing. Maggie sat with that knowledge for 60 seconds. Then she moved Emma gently off her shoulder and transferred her weight to the table edge and got up without waking either girl. She went to the hook by the back door and took down Cole's heaviest coat, he had too, and had taken the work one, which was not the warmest, and she put it on over her own layers. She found the rope she'd seen hung on a nail inside the back door, which she'd noticed, and filed away, the way she filed away everything that might be useful someday. She tied one end to the door handle. She coiled the rest over her shoulder. She opened the door, and the storm hit her like a wall cold, and wind, and a stinging ice pellet sleet, that was not quite snow and not quite rain, and was worse than either, and she leaned into it and went. The rope paid out behind her. She counted her steps. She had walked this path from the back door to the barn to the north fence line corridor. Enough times that her feet knew it even without her eyes, which was fortunate because her eyes were almost useless in this, the dark and the sleet combining into a gray-black nothing that had no depth and no direction. She kept going, She found the barn by running into it with her shoulder, which hurt considerably, and she caught her breath against the wall and then moved along it toward the north. "Cole!" she called. The wind ate it. She called again louder, using her whole chest. Nothing. She followed the fence line by feel her left hand on the post wire, her right hand keeping the rope, and she counted steps, and she called again, and the third time she called, she heard something. Not an answer. Not a voice. A sound. Low and irregular, coming from somewhere below and to the left of where she was standing. She dropped to one knee, and her hand found him. He was on the ground, half against the fence post, and half against the earth. One leg at an angle that was wrong, and both hands still gripping the wire he'd been trying to reinforce, when something the post she'd find out later, a rotted-through bottom section that had given way without warning, had sent him down. "Cole?" She got both hands on him. "Cole, look at me." He turned his head. His eyes were open. He'd been conscious the whole time, she realized, conscious and unable to get himself up, and unable to call loud enough to be heard, and lying there in the sleet, making the calculation that a man makes when he's hurt and alone, and trying to figure out how bad it is. "My leg," he said. I tried to get up twice. I can't get up." "Stop trying," she said. "I'm here. Stop trying to get up. You shouldn't be out here." "Cole." Her voice was not gentle. It was the voice she used when someone was about to do something counterproductive because they were too focused on what they thought they should be doing instead of what the situation required. "You can tell me I shouldn't be here once we're inside. Right now, I need you to tell me if anything is broken or if it's a sprain." He breathed. "Don't know. It went out from under me when the post gave. Came down hard on the right." She ran her hands along his right leg as carefully as she could. He pulled a sharp breath through his teeth at the shin, but not at the knee or the hip. "I don't think it's broken," she said. "But I can't be sure. Can you put weight on it at all?" "Tried. It won't hold." "Then you're not putting weight on it. You're going to put weight on me." She repositioned herself. "I'm going to get my arm under your left side. You're going to push up with your left leg, and I'm going to take your weight on the right. Don't try to be considerate about it. Just move." "Maggie, I'm not a small—" Cole. Still not gentle. "I am aware of what you weigh. We can discuss it later. Move." He moved. She took his weight. He was not a small man, and she did not pretend otherwise, even inside her own head, because pretending things weren't what they were had never helped her once in her life. He was heavy, and the ground was iced and uncertain, and she had a rope attached to a door handle somewhere behind her, and two little girls in a kitchen who could not lose anyone else. She held him up. And she started back along the fence line, one hand on the wire, one arm around him. Both of them leaning into the wind at an angle that would have looked absurd in any other context and was simply necessary in this one. He was trying to help. She could feel it, the effort he was making to take some of his own weight, to not lean on her more than he had to. She didn't tell him to stop because the effort was keeping him conscious, and that was worth something. "Lily and Emma," he managed. "In the kitchen. Asleep or close to it." "You left them." "For 5 minutes," she said. "They're next to a banked fire under 2 blankets. They're fine." He went quiet. She didn't know if that was trust or exhaustion or both, and it didn't matter. She followed the rope back. It felt longer going back than going out the way distances work when you are carrying something that matters. The sleet was directly in their faces now, and she kept her head down and counted steps and did not think about whether she was going the right direction, because doubt at this particular moment was a luxury she couldn't afford. And she knew the direction, she knew it, and she kept going. The door appeared out of the dark. She got him to the steps. She got him through the door. The warmth of the kitchen hit them like a physical thing, and Cole let out a breath that was not quite a sound and not quite a word, and Maggie lowered him into the closest chair and stood up straight and let herself breathe for 5 full seconds. Emma was awake. She was standing at the edge of the kitchen, still wrapped in her blanket, very still, watching her father in the chair with an expression that was terror and relief, cycling through each other too fast to separate. "He's all right," Maggie said to her before the child could speak. "He fell and hurt his leg and he's cold and he needs to warm up. But he's all right." Emma crossed the kitchen and put her arms around her father's neck and held on. Cole held her back with one arm and looked at Maggie over Emma's head. His expression was something she didn't have a word for. Not gratitude exactly, though that was in it. Not shock, though that was in it too. It was the expression of a man who has been profoundly surprised by something he thought he understood, the look of someone who believed they knew the shape of a thing, and has just discovered the shape is entirely different from what they assumed. "You came out in that," he said. "You were taking too long," Maggie said. "You couldn't have known where I knew the fence line," she said. "I walked it with you twice. I counted from the door." He stared at her. Lily was awake now too, standing in the kitchen doorway, and she did not throw herself at her father the way Emma had. She stood very still and looked at him, and then looked at Maggie, and then looked at him again, and said in a voice that was trying very hard to be steady, "You're back." "I'm back," Cole said. Lily nodded once. Then she came to the table and sat down beside her father and put her hand over his on the tablecloth, not a hug, because Lily, in extremity, got careful rather than expansive, and kept it there. Maggie got the kettle on and found the whiskey Cole kept for emergencies in the cabinet above the stove, and poured a measure of it into a cup and added hot water and put it in front of him. She examined his leg properly in the lamplight. Not broken, she was increasingly certain, but badly wrenched at the ankle and bruised deeply at the shin where the post had caught him. She found cloth strips and wrapped it tightly and told him to keep it elevated, and made no commentary on the sounds he made during the process. "You're going to be off it for at least a week," she told him. "The cattle will be managed," she said. "I can ride." He opened his mouth. "Cole," she said, with the patience of someone who has said the same variety of things several times and intends to keep saying it as long as necessary. "I grew up on a farm. I can ride, I can handle cattle, and I know the north pasture rotation because you walked me through it and I paid attention. I will manage the cattle. You will stay off that leg. That is the only arrangement that makes sense, and I think you know it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maggie." She looked at him. His voice when he said what came next was different from his regular voice, quieter and more careful, the way a person speaks when they are choosing words that need to carry more than their surface weight. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the whiskey and hot water. Not for the bandaging. Not for the cattle plan. For coming out in the dark after him. For counting the steps. For knowing where he was." She held his gaze for a moment. "You would have done the same," she said. "Yes," he said. "But that's not—" He stopped, started again. "I want you to know that what you did tonight, it's not something I'll forget. I want you to know that I see it." Maggie looked at him steadily. "I know you do," she said. She went to put more wood on the fire. Cole watched her move around his kitchen. The kitchen she had remade the space she had learned and inhabited and understood more thoroughly now than he did himself, and he felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for 2 years. Something that had nothing to do with the leg, or the storm, or even the cattle. It had to do with what it meant to not be alone. Not the not alone of having children in the house, though that was its own thing. The not alone of having someone beside you who could be counted on when the worst arrived without warning. Someone who would come out in the dark with a rope tied to a door handle and count steps through a sleet storm because you were taking too long to come home. He had been alone for 2 years. He had not known until tonight how alone. The storm broke toward morning. It went the way Kansas storms go, without apology, without residue, leaving behind a cold quiet that had an almost physical quality, like the silence after a very loud sound. When gray light began to come through the kitchen window, both girls were asleep again at the table heads on their folded arms. Cole was in the chair, with his leg elevated on a second chair, awake, watching the light come. Maggie had not slept. She was at the stove, had been at the stove for most of the night, keeping the fire, keeping the kettle warm, doing the things that needed doing. And she was tired in the deep muscle way that goes past exhaustion into a kind of transparency, where you can feel exactly the outline of what your body is and what it's been through. She heard the sound from outside before Cole did. Hoofbeats. Her head came up. Cole heard it a second later. "That's not one horse." "No," she said. 3 horses by the sound. Coming in from the road at a pace that wasn't emergency, but wasn't casual either. Purposeful. Maggie went to the window and looked out. 2 men she didn't recognize. And one she did. Nathaniel Brooks sat his horse in the cleared yard in front of the Bennett ranch house, with the particular quality of a man who has calculated his entrance and is satisfied with the effect he believes it produces. He was well dressed in his usual way. His horse was good. He looked like money, which was the thing he'd always wanted to look like above all else. Behind him, his 2 companions looked like the kind of men that money hired when it needed to make a point, without quite saying what the point was. Maggie's hands went still at the windowsill. Cole had seen her expression. "Who is it?" She turned from the window. "Nathaniel Brooks," she said. "And he didn't come alone." Cole tried to stand up. His leg made its opinion of this known immediately and loudly. "Stay down," Maggie said. "Maggie." "Cole?" She looked at him directly. "Stay down. I'll go." She watched his face do something complicated, the pride of a man who is supposed to stand between his household and trouble colliding with the physical reality of a leg that was not going to cooperate. "I don't need standing between," she said more quietly. "I've handled Nathaniel Brooks before, and I know things now that I didn't know when I was standing on that platform." She held his gaze. He held hers. Then slowly, he settled back. "Call if you need me," he said. "You couldn't walk to the door," she said. "I'd find a way," he said. And something in his voice made it clear he was not making a figure of speech. Maggie put on her coat and went outside. Nathaniel Brooks had dismounted. He was standing in the yard with the studied ease of a man performing confidence, his thumbs in his vest pockets, looking around the property with an appraiser's eye, and that look, that calculating inventory of what the ranch was and what it had become, told Maggie more in 3 seconds than anything he was about to say. He had heard about the cattle deal, about the accounts, about the house, about what the Bennett ranch had become in 6 weeks. He had heard, and he had recalculated. She recognized the look because she had seen it before on the platform in reverse, the same eyes that had looked at her and found her wanting, now looking at the same woman and finding something else entirely. She stopped in front of him. "Mr. Brooks," she said. "Maggie." He used her first name, as if no time had passed, as if there were no coin lying in the dirt between them. "You're looking well." "I am well," she said. "What do you need?" He smiled. It was the smile of a man who believed his smile was disarming. "Can't a man call on an old acquaintance?" "We're not acquaintances," she said. "You rejected a mail-order arrangement in a public place and left me on a platform with 37 cents. That's not an acquaintance. That's a lesson I already finished learning. So if you've come to say something, say it plainly." Something moved behind his eyes, a flicker of reassessment quickly managed. "I heard you've been doing well out here," he said. "I heard the Bennett operation has improved considerably." "It has." "I heard you've been instrumental in that." "I have." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I made a mistake, Maggie. I think you know that. I was thinking about appearances when I should have been thinking about substance." She looked at him. "I have a large ranch," he said. "Larger than this. Better land, better water rights, better position at market. I have a house that a woman like you could do a great deal with. I'm prepared to make a formal offer, a generous one, if you'd be willing to come back and consider the original arrangement." The yard was quiet. Somewhere behind her she was aware of the kitchen window. Of Cole at that window watching. She looked at Nathaniel Brooks, and she thought about the coin in the dirt. She thought about the gold coin landing in the dust while 50 people watched. She thought about a moment when she had nothing 37 cents and a jar of blackberry preserves and no way home, and had still left the coin where it fell, because some things matter more than money, and she had always known which things those were. "No," she said. He blinked. "I haven't made the full offer yet." "It doesn't matter what the offer is," she said. "You didn't reject me because I wasn't enough. I want you to understand that. I was always enough. You rejected me because you couldn't see past what you thought I looked like to what I actually was. And the fact that you can see it now doesn't change the fact that you couldn't see it then when it would have cost you something." He was quiet. "You want to offer me a larger ranch?" she said. "But I'm not looking for a larger ranch. I'm looking for a man who could walk into a train station and see a woman standing alone after being humiliated and choose with no personal advantage whatsoever to tip his hat and say something honest." She held his gaze. "You're not that man. You never were. And no offer changes that." Nathaniel Brooks looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly some of the performance went out of his posture. What was left was not sympathetic exactly, but it was honest. "You've built something here," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "I have." "Bennett's a lucky man." "I'm going to go back inside now," Maggie said. "There's a man in there with a hurt leg and 2 little girls who had a long night and a cattle operation that needs attention this morning. I'd appreciate it if you'd take your horses off Bennett land." She didn't wait for him to respond. She turned and walked back to the house. Inside, Cole was at the table he had. She noticed moved to the window, managing his leg in some fashion that could not have been comfortable. He looked at her when she came in and did not ask what had been said, which was its own kind of question. "He's leaving," she said. "What did he want?" She hung up her coat. She turned around. She looked at Cole Bennett. This man who could not walk to the door, but had said he would find a way, with something she did not know the name of and did not need to name because it was not a feeling that required vocabulary. "He came to find out what I'd become," she said. "Now he knows." Cole looked at her steadily. "What did you tell him?" "The truth," she said. "That I'm not available. That I'm already somewhere I want to be." The kitchen went very quiet. Cole held her gaze with the particular steadiness of a man who is not going to look away because looking away would be dishonest, and whatever else Cole Bennett was, he was not dishonest. "Maggie," he said. She looked at him and waited. "When my leg stops being useless," he said carefully, "I'd like to have a conversation with you, a real one, about what happens next." She looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. She went to the stove and picked up the kettle. "Right now, though," she said, "I need to see to the cattle, and you need to stay off that leg, and those girls are going to wake up hungry." "Agreed," Cole said. She looked back at him once. He was watching her with that expression she still didn't have a word for, the one that had been building since the night she walked into the storm and came back with him and had not left his face entirely since. She turned back to the stove. Outside, the sound of 3 horses moving away down the road carried through the cold, clear air, and then faded, and the Kansas morning settled into the quiet that follows when something that needed to happen has finally happened, and the world can get back to what it was doing. Cole's leg kept him off the north pasture for 9 days. Maggie managed the cattle for 8 of them. She did not do it perfectly. She would have been the first to say so, but she did it competently, which was the thing that mattered, and she did it without complaint. Which was the thing Cole noticed. She was up before light back after dark, and in between she managed the household and the girls' lessons, and the accounts and the correspondence with the Ellsworth broker, as if she were made of something denser than ordinary people. On the 3rd day, Tom Perkins rode over from the neighboring ranch, and found her fixing a section of the east fence line that had been weakened in the storm. He sat on his horse and watched her work for a moment. "Ma'am," he said. "Mr. Perkins," she said without looking up from the wire. "Cole hurt bad. Badly wrenched ankle. He'll be on it in another week." Perkins was quiet for a moment. "You need a hand with that fence." "I've got it," she said. "But if you're inclined to be useful, the section 40 yards north needs a new post. The base rotted out. That's what put Cole down in the first place." Perkins dismounted without another word and went 40 yards north. They worked in companionable silence for an hour. When they were done, Perkins remounted and looked at her with the appraising, uncomplicated respect that practical men extend to practical people when they have witnessed competence firsthand. "Bennett doesn't know what he's got," he said. "I think he's starting to," Maggie said. Perkins almost smiled. He tipped his hat and rode off. On the 9th day, Cole walked to the barn without the crutch Maggie had fashioned for him from a fence post, and a piece of leather, tested his weight on the ankle, decided it would hold, and came back to the kitchen with a purposeful expression that she recognized. "Ready for that conversation," he said. She was sitting at the table with the household ledger. She closed it. "Sit down first," she said. "You've been on that ankle for 30 seconds, and you're already pushing it." He sat. She looked at him across the table. He looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment, which was by now a comfortable thing, the silence of two people who had been through enough together that they no longer needed to fill every space with words. Cole put his hands flat on the table. "I want to ask you to marry me," he said. "I want to do it properly, not as a practical arrangement, and not because you have nowhere else to go, because that's not the situation anymore, and we both know it. You could go anywhere. You could walk into any ranch in this county and be taken on inside of a day based on what you've built here." He paused. "I want you to stay because you want to stay, and I want to know if you do." Maggie looked at him. "Cole," she said. "Yeah, you're doing it again." He frowned slightly. "Doing what?" "Making a business case," she said, "when what I think you actually mean is something simpler." He was quiet for a beat. Then the careful management left his face, and what was underneath it was simpler, plainer, less constructed, the expression of a man who has been holding something in a formal shape for long enough that he's tired of the shape. "I love you," he said. "That's what I mean. I've been watching you for 3 months run this ranch and raise my daughters and face down hard situations and walk out in the dark after a man who should have been able to take care of himself. And somewhere in there, I stopped thinking of you as someone who was helping me and started thinking of you as the person I didn't know I was missing. And I'd like you to be my wife, not my housekeeper, not my arrangement, my wife." The kitchen was very quiet. Maggie held his gaze. Her hands, which had been still on the closed ledger, were very still. "You understand," she said, "that I'm not going to get smaller." "I know that. I'm not going to become something easier to explain to people." "Maggie!" His voice was direct and unhurried. "If you were easier to explain to people, I don't reckon you'd be the woman I just described." She looked at him for another moment. Then something shifted in her face, not dramatically, not with tears or declaration, just a quiet internal shifting the way a door opens when the person on the other side finally puts their weight against it in the right direction. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you." Cole breathed. It was a single breath, quiet and deep, the kind that only happens when you've been holding something tensed for a long time and have finally let it go. "Good," he said. "Good," she agreed. They sat at the table for another moment, not touching, not performing anything, just sitting in the fact of it, the plain extraordinary ordinary fact of two people who had found each other sideways and were choosing to stay. Then Maggie opened the ledger again. "There's a credit discrepancy in the October accounts I want to show you," she said. Cole stared at her for half a second. Then he laughed, the same surprised, unguarded laugh she'd first heard in the barn, the one that made him look like a younger man, and leaned forward to look at the ledger with her. They told the girls that evening after supper. Lily received the news with the grave, considered expression of someone who had been thinking about this possibility for some time and had already formed opinions about it. "Does this mean Miss Maggie is our mother now?" she said. "It means she'll be your stepmother," Cole said. Lily looked at Maggie. "What do we call you?" Maggie looked back at her. "You can call me whatever feels right. There's no wrong answer." Lily thought about it with her characteristic seriousness. "I'm going to call you Mama Maggie," she said. "For now, until we figure out if just Mama is right." Emma, who had been quiet through the whole exchange, stood up from her chair, walked around the table to where Maggie was sitting, and put her arms around her neck from behind, and held on without saying anything at all. Maggie reached up and held Emma's arms with both hands and looked at Cole over Emma's head, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say, that the moment wasn't already saying better. What happened next was not anticipated by anyone. Cole rode into Dodge City 3 days later to file papers at the county office and inform the relevant parties of the upcoming change in household status. He was in good spirits. The ankle was holding. The Ellsworth deal was confirmed. The ranch accounts showed the best numbers in 3 years, and he came back in the late afternoon looking like a man who had started the day good and had something happen to him that had made it considerably less so. Maggie saw his expression when he drove into the yard and was at the wagon before he'd set the brake. "What happened?" she said. He climbed down. He stood for a moment. "There's something you need to know," he said, "and I need you to hear it before someone else tells you, because someone will." She waited. "Nathaniel Brooks," he said, "has been talking." Her expression didn't change. "Talking about what?" "About you. About us." Cole's jaw was set in the particular way it went when he was managing his anger carefully. "He's been telling people the feed store, the Cattlemen's Association meeting last week, apparently the county clerk's office this morning, since the clerk saw fit to mention it to me, that you came out here because you had no other options. That you latched on to me because I was convenient. That whatever you've done on this ranch, it's self-serving calculation." Maggie was very still. "He's saying I married up for security," she said flatly. "He's saying it in more words and with more damage," Cole said. "He's questioning whether the Ellsworth deal was legitimate, whether the accounts are accurate. He's implying to the cattlemen that maybe a woman managing a ranch's books has a conflict of interest." The silence stretched. Maggie looked at the house. She looked at the barn. She looked at the fence line that she had helped repair, and the kitchen garden she had planted, and the ledger that was sitting on the kitchen table with 3 months of work in it. "What exactly," she said very quietly, "did he say about the accounts? That the numbers might not be what they appear to be." "I see." She turned and walked to the house. Cole followed. Inside, she went directly to the kitchen table and opened the ledger and stood over it with her hands flat on either side of it and stood there for 60 seconds. Not moving, her eyes going through the columns with the focus of someone doing several things at once, remembering, calculating, deciding. Then she looked up. "I need paper," she said. "And I need you to sit down because this is going to take a while, and I'm going to need you to follow along." "Maggie." "Cole." Her voice was not angry, it was precise. "A man has questioned my work. He's done it publicly and with intent. The response to that is not to be upset. The response is to make the work undeniable." She held his gaze. "Do you have the original receipts from the Whitfield contracts in the lockbox? Get them. And the ones from the first Ellsworth shipment. And anything with a date and a number on it from the past 3 months." She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "We're going to build a document that makes the last 3 months of this ranch's accounts so transparent that anyone who looks at them will understand exactly what happened here and exactly why the numbers are what they are." Cole looked at her. "You're going to fight him with paperwork," he said. "I'm going to fight him with facts," she said, "which is the only fight worth having." He got the lockbox. They worked until midnight. What emerged was not merely an accounting of receipts and payments. It was a full record organized by date and category cross-referenced, with market rates annotated in Maggie's clear, unhurried handwriting, with explanations of every decision made and why. The Whitfield discrepancy. The Ellsworth rate comparison. The credit renegotiation at the dry goods store. The household expense reduction. Every number with a source, and every source with a date. It was, Cole thought, looking at it, when they were done, the most complete financial accounting of a ranch he had ever seen. "Take that to the Cattlemen's Association," she said. "Not defensively, matter-of-factly. Tell them you've been implementing new record-keeping practices, and you'd welcome any of them to review them." Why not defensively? Because a man who defends himself looks like he has something to defend. A man who invites scrutiny looks like he has nothing to hide. She straightened the pages. "There's nothing to hide. Let them look." Cole held the document in both hands and looked at it and then at her. "I ever tell you," he said, "that you're the most dangerous person I've ever been on the same side as—" "You have not," she said. "Consider yourself told." She looked back at the table and began gathering the loose papers. "There's one more thing," Cole said. She looked up. "I'm going to talk to Brooks directly," he said. "Not about you. About me. About what it means to spread a lie about a woman's character in a community where she has to live." His voice was quiet and utterly even. "I want you to know I'm going to do that." Maggie looked at him for a moment. "I won't stop you," she said. "But don't do it for me. Do it because it's right." "Both things can be true," Cole said. She considered that. "Yes," she said, "they can." What happened at the Cattlemen's Association meeting 3 days later would be talked about in Dodge City for a long time, though the accounts would vary depending on who was doing the telling. What was consistent across all accounts was this. Cole Bennett stood up at the meeting and presented 3 months of ranch accounts so thorough and so clear that 2 of the men in the room asked afterward who had kept the books and whether he'd be willing to share the method. What was also consistent was that he looked at Nathaniel Brooks across the room when he was done and said simply, "I'd welcome any question about any number in this document, and I'd caution anyone in this room to be careful about repeating claims for which there is no evidence, because I will respond to those claims through whatever legal channel is available to me." Nathaniel Brooks said nothing. He left before the meeting was over. He did not return to the next month's meeting. And the accounts stood. Tom Perkins found Cole afterward in the street. "You know what that just did?" Perkins said. "I know what it did," Cole said. Perkins looked at him. "She do those books herself. She built the whole system." Perkins shook his head slowly with the expression of a man recalibrating something he thought he already understood. "That woman is going to make this county better just by being in it." "She already has," Cole said. What Cole didn't tell Perkins was what had happened 2 days before the meeting when he'd ridden to the Brooks Ranch. He'd found Nathaniel in the yard. Nathaniel had seen him coming and had the expression of a man who has been expecting something and has not been enjoying the wait. Cole dismounted. He stood in the yard. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I want to be clear about that. If I wanted to fight, I'd have brought witnesses." Nathaniel said nothing. "I want to say one thing to you directly," Cole said. "The woman you rejected on that platform, the one you threw a coin at in front of 50 people, she came to my ranch and she worked. She fixed what was broken and she built what was missing, and she went out in a sleet storm and carried me home when I couldn't do it myself. She is going to be my wife. She is going to raise my daughters. And she is going to be in this community for the rest of her life." He paused. "You can say whatever you like about me. I can manage that. But if I hear of one more word one said about her character or her work or her motives, I will take it to the territorial judge, and I will let the law decide what to do with a man who publicly defames a woman to protect his own wounded pride. Are we clear?" Nathaniel looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "She turned me down." "I know she did. She turned down the bigger ranch and the better land deal and—" "Nathaniel." Cole's voice was quiet. "She turned down a man who couldn't see her, that's all. It's got nothing to do with the land." Nathaniel looked away. Something moved across his face that Cole couldn't entirely read. Not remorse exactly, but some older cousin of it. The look of a man beginning to understand what he had measured and what he had not, and what the difference cost him. Cole remounted. "Good day," he said. He didn't look back, but he heard as he rode out of the yard Nathaniel say something low, not to him, just to the air. He couldn't hear the words. He didn't need to. The next 3 weeks moved differently from the ones before, still busy, still full, but with a different quality to the fullness. The ranch was entering a new season, and the work that came with it was the work of preparation and growth, rather than repair, which felt in Maggie's experience like a different kind of labor entirely. You repaired things out of necessity. You grew things out of intention. She had been doing a great deal of both for months. Now it was shifting toward the second. She and Cole established a rhythm that neither of them had designed exactly, but that had developed organically in the way functional partnerships do, through 1,000 small negotiations, through learning each other's methods, through the ongoing experiment of two capable, stubborn people figuring out how to inhabit the same space without requiring the other to be smaller. It was not always smooth. There was the day Cole made a decision about the North Herd rotation without consulting her, and she found out from Tom Perkins in passing and came home and said to him directly and without preamble, "If it's my ranch too, I need to know what's being decided about it." Cole looked at her. "I've been making decisions about this ranch alone for 6 years." "I know," she said. "And I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking you to include me. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. "I should have told you." "Yes," she said. "You should have." And that was the end of it. No lingering, no performance of forgiveness. No inventory of past grievances. Just a clean acknowledgement on both sides, and a forward movement which was Maggie had come to believe the only way two honest people could actually build something together. There was also the afternoon Lily announced at the supper table that a girl in town had said Maggie wasn't her real mother, and couldn't ever be because her real mother was dead. The table went very quiet. Cole opened his mouth. Maggie put her hand on his arm. She looked at Lily. "What did you say back?" Lily's chin was up in the way it went when she was holding something complicated together by force of will. "I said that real means something different to different people, and that the woman sitting at our kitchen table every morning is real enough for me." Emma beside her nodded once. Maggie looked at both of them. "Your mother loved you," she said. "That is real, and it always will be, and nothing that happens changes it. And what I have with you—" She paused. "That's real too. It's a different kind of real. It doesn't replace anything. It's just its own thing." Lily's chin wobbled just once. Then she straightened it. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Maggie said. Cole looked across the table at her with that expression, the one she'd stopped trying to name, because it seemed to be growing, and she was no longer sure any single word was adequate. Later, after the girls were in bed, he said, "You always know what to say to them." "I don't," she said honestly. "I know what not to say. The rest I figure out as I go." "How?" She thought about it. "I think about what someone should have said to me," she said quietly. "When I was their age, and someone made me feel like I was less than. I think about what I needed to hear. And then I say that." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry no one said those things to you when you were young." She looked at him. "You're saying them now," she said. "That counts." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She let him. They sat like that for a while, hand over hand on the kitchen table, the lamp burning between them, the prairie dark and quiet outside, and neither of them said anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying, and they had both learned by now to recognize the moments that were better left to themselves. 3 days before the wedding, a woman came to the ranch that Maggie had not expected. Her name was Ruth Alderman, and she was the most prominent woman in the Ladies' Aid Society of the Dodge City First Methodist Church, which meant she was the most prominent woman in the relevant social architecture of the county, full stop. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, and moved with the decisive quality of someone who had made most of the important decisions in every room she'd ever occupied. She arrived alone, which was itself a signal. Maggie went to the door. "Mrs. Alderman," she said. "Miss Caldwell." The woman looked at her with a directness that was not unfriendly, but was certainly not soft. "I've been wanting to come out here for some weeks. I'm sorry it took this long." "Please come in," Maggie said. Mrs. Alderman came in and sat at the kitchen table and declined coffee and looked around the kitchen with those sharp eyes. "I heard about what Brooks was saying," she said. "I want you to know that I told the Women's Circle directly that I have looked at the Bennett accounts. Tom Perkins showed me the document you prepared. He thought I should see it, and that any woman who repeated Brooks's implications would find her membership in the circle under review." Maggie looked at her. "I also want to say," Mrs. Alderman continued, and her voice changed quality, slightly became less official, more personal, "that I saw what happened on that platform. I was there. I was at the far end and I didn't say anything. And I've been thinking about that since." Maggie was very still. "I've been in this town for 20 years, Mrs. Alderman said. "I've seen a great many things, and I have not always done what was right when it was difficult." She held Maggie's gaze with a steadiness that took something. "I should have said something that day. I should have walked over. I didn't." The kitchen was quiet. "Why are you telling me this?" Maggie said. "Because you deserve to hear it," Mrs. Alderman said, "and because I'm too old to carry things I should put down." Maggie looked at her for a long moment. "All right," she said. "All right. All right," Maggie said again. "You've said it. I've heard it. We can start from here." Mrs. Alderman looked at her. Then something in the older woman's face opened just slightly, just at the edges, and she said, "You know I came here expecting to have to do more work than this. I don't hold things longer than they're useful," Maggie said. "It takes up space I could be using for something else." Mrs. Alderman almost smiled. "Cole Bennett," she said, standing to go, "has no idea." "He's starting to figure it out," Maggie said. Mrs. Alderman laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and picked up her bag and walked to the door. At the threshold she turned. "The Ladies' Aid Society," she said, "would be glad to have you as a member. When you're ready. No rush." Maggie considered. "I'll come to the next meeting," she said. Mrs. Alderman nodded, satisfied, and left. Maggie stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her right away, and thought about platforms and coins, and 50 people who didn't speak, and one who finally did. And she thought about the distance between the moment she'd arrived in this town and the moment she was standing in now, and the thought she had was not triumphant and not sad. It was something quieter and more permanent than either. It was the thought of a woman who knows finally and without qualification exactly where she stands. And she stood on her own land, in her own kitchen, with her own name already being spoken in this town in a tone that had nothing to do with pity. 3 more days, she thought, and then it would be official. Not that it needed to be. It had been real for a while now. The paperwork was just the world catching up. The morning of the wedding, Maggie woke before anyone else in the house. She lay still for a moment in the early dark, listening to the quiet. The particular quiet of a house that is sleeping and does not yet know what the day is going to be. The creak of the walls, the sound of wind under the eaves, the distant low sound of the cattle moving somewhere out in the dark pasture. She had heard all of these sounds every morning for nearly 4 months now. She knew them the way you know the sounds of a place that belongs to you. She got up. She dressed without a lamp because she knew where everything was. And she went to the kitchen and built the fire and put the kettle on and stood at the window while the sky began its slow change from black to the particular deep blue that comes just before gray. And she thought about the day ahead with the same focused, practical attention she gave to everything, what needed to happen, in what order, and what she needed to be for each part of it. The dress was hanging in her room. She had made it herself over 3 weeks of evenings at the kitchen table after the girls were in bed and the accounts were done. Cream-colored cotton simple lines, nothing that required her to be other than what she was. She had not tried to make herself look like the kind of woman who got married in Dodge City. She had made herself a dress that looked like her, solid and clean, and without pretense, the kind of dress that would survive past the ceremony and be useful afterward. Cole had asked once if she wanted to order something from the catalog. She had said no. He had not pressed. She heard a door open down the hall. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. This was, Maggie thought, the most consistent thing about the past 4 months, Emma appearing in doorways. Always watchful. Always arriving quietly, as if she wasn't entirely sure she had permission to be in the room, but was willing to try. "You're up early," Maggie said. "I couldn't sleep," Emma said. "I kept thinking about today." Good thinking, or worried thinking? Emma considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Both, I think. "That's about right for a big day," Maggie said. "Come sit down." Emma came and sat on her stool by the stove. They were quiet for a moment. Then Emma said, "After today, are you going to be different?" Maggie looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Emma's hands moved in her lap, searching for the words. "Right now, you're Miss Maggie. After today, you'll be Mrs. Bennett. And I wondered if that was going to make you different, if it was going to change things." Maggie thought about the question. "The name changes," she said. "The rest of it, what we have, you and me, that doesn't change because of a ceremony. That already is what it is. A name just makes it official." Emma looked at her. "What is it?" "What we have." Maggie held her gaze. "It's real," she said. "Whatever word we put on it, it's real." Emma nodded slowly, with the particular solemnity of a child filing something important away. Then she said, "Lily cried last night. She didn't want me to hear, but I did." "I know," Maggie said. "I heard her too." Emma looked up. "Are you going to say something to her?" "I'm going to let her tell me when she's ready," Maggie said. "Lily has her own way of getting to things. If I go straight at her, she'll close up. If I wait, she'll come around." Emma thought about this. "That's true," she said. "She does that." "I've noticed," Maggie said. "I've been paying attention." Emma almost smiled. It was almost smile, the small quick one she saved for moments when something landed exactly right. Maggie turned back to the kettle. Behind her she heard Emma get up from the stool and cross the kitchen. She felt a small hand close around her arm, briefly, the way Emma touched things she cared about, quickly, carefully making sure, and then letting go. "Miss Maggie," she said. "Yes?" "I'm glad you didn't pick up the coin." Maggie kept her eyes on the kettle. "Me too," she said quietly. "Me too." Lily came in 20 minutes later, red-eyed but composed, with her chin at the angle it went when she had decided something and was not going to be argued with about it. She sat down at the table and looked at Maggie directly. "I cried last night," she said. "I know," Maggie said. Lily's chin came up another degree. "It wasn't because I was sad. I didn't think it was. It was because—" She stopped. Started again. "It was because I kept thinking that if things had been different, if you'd never come to Dodge City, if Papa had been somewhere else that day at the station, if he hadn't—" She stopped again. "We almost didn't have you. That's what I kept thinking. We almost didn't have you, and it made me scared even though it already happened." Maggie set down the cup she was holding. She crossed to the table and sat down across from Lily and looked at her directly. "Lily," she said, "you have me. That's the part that's true. Everything else is a story that didn't happen. You can be scared of a story that didn't happen, but you don't have to live in it." Lily looked at her with those clear, too old eyes. "What if you leave?" she said. "What if something happens and you—" "I'm not going anywhere," Maggie said. "You can't promise that," Lily said. "Mama didn't promise either, but she also didn't plan to—" "You're right," Maggie said. I can't promise the future. Nobody can. What I can tell you is what's true right now, today, this morning. Right now I am in this kitchen. I am marrying your father today. I am not leaving. That is what's true. Lily held her gaze. And if something happens, Maggie said more quietly, if something I can't control happens someday, I need you to know that what is between us is not the kind of thing that stops. What I am to you, whatever word we settle on for it, that doesn't stop. Your mama is still your mama even though she's gone. I will still be whatever I am to you, even if the world goes sideways. Do you understand what I'm saying? Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she got up from her chair and came around the table and hugged Maggie, not the careful tentative version, but a real one. Arms around her neck and face pressed to her shoulder. And Maggie put her arms around her and held on and let Lily be whatever she needed to be, which was 7 years old and frightened and full of love, and not yet sure how to hold all of that at the same time. Okay, Lily said, muffled into her shoulder. Okay, Maggie said. They pulled apart. Lily wiped her face with the back of her hand with the brisk, unsentimental efficiency she used to manage her own feelings. All right, she said. I'm going to go get dressed. Good idea, Maggie said. Lily went. Emma from the stool by the stove watched all of this and then looked at Maggie. Told you she'd come around, Maggie said. You said to wait, Emma said. I did. How did you know? Maggie looked at her. Because she loves hard and it frightens her. And when that happens, she needs a moment to decide to trust it. That's not a flaw. That's just how Lily loves. Emma was quiet. Then very quietly. How do I love? Maggie smiled, a real one, full and unguarded in the way she rarely was with adults, but had stopped guarding around these two. Quietly, she said, and completely, and you show up in doorways. Emma looked at her for a moment. Then she got off the stool and went to get dressed too. Cole was in the barn when Maggie came out an hour later, dressed and ready, the cream-colored dress, simple against the morning light. He heard her come in. He turned. He looked at her for a moment without saying anything. Then he said, "You look like yourself." "That's what I was going for," she said. He had put on his good shirt and his best hat, and he looked, she thought, like exactly what he was. A man who worked hard and didn't perform things, and had cleaned up because the occasion warranted it, and not because he needed to be something other than what he was. "You nervous?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "Are you?" "A little," he said, which was more honest than most men would have been. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Because I want to get it right. All of it. I've been doing this alone for 2 years, and I know how to do that. Doing it with someone else doing it with you, I want to get that right." "Cole," she said, "you already are." He looked at her steadily. "We both are," she said. "That's not something that happens at a ceremony. It's something that's been happening for 4 months. Today is just the day we say it out loud in front of witnesses." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When I saw you on that platform, Cole, let me say it," he said. "I've been thinking about how to say it right, and I want to say it before we go in there." He paused. "When I saw you on that platform, I didn't know who you were. I just saw a woman who'd been treated like she was worth less than she was, and I knew what that looked like because I grew up watching my mother get treated that way, and I couldn't walk away from it. That's why I stopped. That's all it was at first." He held her gaze. "But then you said you had 37 cents and a jar of blackberry preserves, and something in the way you said it, the exact way you said it, like you were taking inventory, like you were already figuring out what to build with what you had. I thought that's someone worth knowing." Maggie looked at him. "And I was right," he said. "I want you to know that. I was exactly right." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "The blackberry preserves were a good idea after all." Cole laughed. She let herself laugh too. They stood in the barn, laughing for a moment like two people who have earned the right to laugh together, and then Cole offered his arm, and she took it, and they walked out into the morning. The wedding was small. Tom Perkins and his wife, the widow Morrison. Clara Yates, who had come out from town and stood very straight and very still. The whole time her bruise long healed her face, carrying the expression of someone watching. Something that is giving them permission to believe in something they had stopped believing in. Mrs. Alderman, who stood beside Reverend Cole, and nodded when he began speaking, as if approving of his choice of words. Lily and Emma stood on either side of Maggie. Lily held Maggie's hand. Emma stood close enough to touch, but kept her hands at her sides, which was... Maggie had come to understand Emma's version of holding on. The vows were simple. When Cole said, "I will," he said it the way he said everything important, without performance, without decoration, looking directly at her. When Maggie said, "I will," she said it the same way. The Reverend said the words that made it official. Cole kissed her briefly, warmly, the kiss of a man who is not performing for the audience, but is also not indifferent to the moment. Lily squeezed her hand hard. Emma's hand found her arm. The small group of witnesses made the sounds that witnesses make, and the morning went on. Being the morning, it was the same sky, the same wind, the same Kansas land holding all of it without comment. Afterward, at the kitchen table that now comfortably seated 5, but had started with 3 over coffee and the cake that Mrs. Perkins had brought, and the blackberry preserves that Maggie had opened, because the occasion called for them. Tom Perkins looked across the table at Maggie and said, "You know what you've done out here, don't you?" Maggie looked at him. "You turned a struggling outfit into one of the best-run ranches in the county in 4 months," he said. It was a statement of fact delivered with the directness of a man who doesn't bother with compliments, but has no problem with true things. "My wife wants me to ask if you'd consider talking to the women's circle about household accounts. Apparently half the wives in town don't know what their households actually cost." Maggie looked at him. "I'd be glad to." "Good." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his cake. Mrs. Alderman across the table caught Maggie's eye and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. Clara Yates at the end of the table said, "Mrs. Morrison taught me how to make preserves last week." Maggie looked at her. "How did it go?" "I burned the first batch," Clara said. "The second was all right." "The second batch always is," Maggie said. Clara smiled, a real one, the kind that reaches a person's eyes, and something moved through it that Maggie recognized because she had felt it herself on a platform, leaving a coin in the dirt. The particular feeling of being in the right place at the right time, having made the right choice, even though none of it had been guaranteed. Especially because none of it had been guaranteed. That evening, after everyone had gone and the girls were in bed, Cole and Maggie sat on the porch in the cooling air. Not talking, just sitting. The stars were coming out the way they did over the Kansas prairie, one at a time, then all at once until the sky was crowded with them. After a while, Cole said, "You know what Lily told me this afternoon?" "What?" "She told me she's decided to call you Mama." He paused. "Not Mama Maggie, just Mama." Maggie was still. She said she thought about it all day, and she decided that the word was big enough for 2 people. Her first mama and you. She said the word didn't have to choose. Maggie looked at the sky. She breathed. "She's right," she said when she could say it steadily. "It doesn't." Cole reached over and took her hand. She let him. They sat like that while the stars finished coming out, while the cattle settled, while the prairie did what the prairie always did, held everything without asking anything in return. After a long while, Maggie said, "I want to start a proper school." Cole turned to look at her. "In town?" she said. "Or near enough? There are families out here whose children aren't getting any schooling at all. Lily and Emma are ahead now, but when I walk them into town, I see children their age who can't write their own names." She paused. "I want to do something about that." Cole was quiet for a moment. "How?" he said. Not as a challenge, as a genuine question. "I'll talk to Mrs. Alderman," she said. "The Ladies' Aid Society has resources if someone knows how to ask for them. The county has land provision if someone knows how to file. The Cattlemen's Association has members who have children who need schooling and might be inclined to contribute if someone explains the direct benefit to them. She paused. I know how to ask for things. I know how to explain direct benefits. I've been doing both since I got here. Cole held her hand and said nothing for a moment. Then, you're going to build a school. I'm going to try, she said. There's a difference. Not with you there isn't, he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her with that expression, the one she had stopped trying to name, because it had become simply the way he looked at her, the way his face went when he was seeing her clearly and not editing what he saw. Who are you? He said, not plaintively, with genuine wonder. Maggie looked out at the prairie. She thought about a train platform, a coin in the dirt, 37 cents and a jar of blackberry preserves, a man with 2 small daughters and the particular steadiness of someone who sees a storm and walks toward it anyway. She thought about 4 months of mornings, of accounts and fence lines and school books and storms, of a child's hand reaching out and pulling back, of a woman named Clara walking out of a hard situation into a small possible future because someone had been paying attention. She thought about what it meant to be seen, not rescued. Seen. I'm Margaret Bennett, she said. I'm the woman who runs this ranch and raises these girls and is going to build a school in this county if it takes her the rest of her life. She paused. And I'm the woman who left a coin in the dirt on a train platform in Dodge City and built everything she needed from the ground up because nobody gave her a reason to believe she couldn't. Cole's hand tightened on hers. The stars held, the prairie held, and Margaret Bennett, who had arrived with 37 cents and a jar of preserves and a worn leather suitcase, and not one single thing to prove to anyone except herself, sat on the porch of her own home, on her own land, in the company of the man who had chosen to see her, and she was without qualification, or apology, or condition exactly where she was supposed to be. She was not the unwanted bride from the train station. She was never